Okay, this is going to be part two of my kind of hopefully in a nutshell tutorial of how to play Land of the Free by Joe Crone. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm not sure if I am, but having the rules can seem kind of foreboding, and the reason a little bit hard to get your head around sometimes because they're kind of innovative and they're unique, but they're actually quite fun. And having played a game with someone and having it somewhat fresh in my mind, even though I would not say I'm an expert at all, I am going to go briefly through how you play this. So, first thing is, you got this turn sequence. And I had a tutorial earlier explaining how you set up your forces. But in this particular case, I'm going to be looking at this British brigade. It has an army commander, and it has a brigade commander, and it has this regiment and this regiment. Now, you're usually going to have more than one brigade, right, for an army, and that would be the case here too. But I'm going to try to keep this simple. So, and of course, we got rebels on the other side, and we happen to be in the middle of a battle at the point. But I'm just going to kind of show you. So every turn, first thing you do is you roll for the force commander's command points. Force commander is basically the army commander. And they're already going to have a rating from the setup, if you see tutorial number 1, which will determine how many dice they get to roll and how you determine how many points they get for a command. Now, in this particular case, this army commander came out as skilled. So he has a morale value of 7, a move and command range of 18, and to choose his skills, find out how many command points he gets, he rolls 2 dice, 2d3, which, for those unfamiliar, that means you roll 6-sided dice. A 1 and a 2 is a 1, 3 and a 4 is a 2, and a 5 and a 6 is a 3. You roll 2 dice, and he gets to choose the largest dice and use that as a D3 indicator for how many command points he gets. So for instance, if he rolled a 6, that translates into 3. So he'd get, if you roll a 6 and a 2, he's going to choose a 6, and he'd get 3 command points. I like to use, to mark those, I have these 18th century reproduction coins. You can get them from James Townsend and Sons. And I like using those. But you obviously could use anything you wanted to do that. So now he's got 3 command points, and that can be spent to push units on to do extra things and in the game. First, we do it for this side. We do that for the other side too. They could be doing that simultaneously, determining how many command points their army commander has. Next thing we're going to do is determine initiative. And to do initiative, to determine both armies, both sides are going to do this. They're going to roll a dice. It's a d6, so a 6 is a 6. And then they're going to add the command points that they have. In this case, it's 3. So if it was a 6, now we're up to 9. And then +1 for player with more scout elements. So what that means, scout elements are, like for instance, these light dragoons. They are scout element, so they would get +1. Hessian Jaegers, they would be a scouting element. They would be +1. So essentially, you get a point for every scout element too. And then you add those numbers together. So in this case, again, if you roll a 6, he would get 6 plus the command points. That's 3. Now we're up to 9. If he has 2 scout elements, now we're up to 11. And you compare that to what the rebels have, the rebel army commander. And whoever has the highest number gets the initiative and gets to decide if they're starting first or second in this game round. Now, this is an important point. This is not a rule set with simultaneous fire. If you shoot first, you cause damage first. And so that would be a reason, often there's an advantage of going second because, the enemy moves in their position, then you react to that. It's always nice to move second, but it's really nice to fire first. And in this particular case, the game, the way it works, it is potentially possible for a regiment to be the last regiment used in a turn, and then become the first regiment in the to be used in the next turn. Which, if you think about that, that means they could fire, twice as much in a row and can cause a lot of damage, as in fact happened in this particular game. So, with that being said, moving on, you make the determination is made. The person who's won the initiative decides if they're going first or second. Now, the book uses the term active and inactive player. Active being whoever, I guess it's pretty obvious what that means. So, essentially, whoever is going first then, the active player, has to determine the command points of their brigadiers, essentially. Their group commanders. They're not the army commander, but the group commanders. So they also have their own, have rolled earlier or been assigned a competence level. This officer ended up, unfortunately, being an incompetent officer. So he's literally a D3 minus 1. So if he rolls a 1, he's literally a 0 and gets no command points whatsoever to help the cause. Forcing the force to rely on the army commander for any kind of boost that might come out. So once that's done, he will basically a brigade of the army commander's choice, of course, because you're usually going to have more than one brigade. You get to choose which brigade to go first. And let's say this brigade is chosen. So what we do is we will activate, in this case, we got 2 regiments in this brigade. You will activate one at a time, and they will do all of their actions before you move on to the other one. So, if we're going to do the 17th first, they do everything, and then the grenadiers get to do something if they want to. And the way, first I'm going to explain this, and then I'll go to a more detailed account of what that entails. So, this one's used. We move out the 17th. They have them do whatever they're going to do. We have the grenadiers do whatever they're going to do. And then what happens is you will move your group commander. He will move after everything is done, because you're going to want to keep him in the command radius of everybody where they end up in the end. That's the goal. And after that is done, the active player has completed all the movements of one brigade. Now we go over to the other side. And they get to choose a brigade. And they do the exact same thing. And they're taking care of a brigade. Then what happens is the initiative comes back to this army again, but a different brigade. So, in this particular game, this is what's left of that second brigade. But, if there was a second brigade that was functioning, it would go through the same process. And then we go over to the rebels, and now they're activating their other brigade. And you go back and forth until all the brigades have done their things that they're going to do. And after everyone's been activated, then you move the force commanders. And the force commanders are the army commanders. So now they're going to move wherever they can move. And the distance they can move is literally determined by their competency level. I guess incompetent people just get lost or something. Their horse isn't very good, or they can't make up their mind, or they're just incompetent, right? So anyway, and you're always going to want them to be within, it's very important. You want them to be in the command radius where it matters. For instance, in this particular game, I'm going to want to be close enough to the gun to try to push the gun to do more. And that ends the turn, and you move on to the next turn. So I almost wonder if I should do another video here, but I think I am going to press on here and explain what you actually do during those turns. So every regiment is going to have, it's going to be on a chart. In this particular case, the top one here is the 17th. Now you see it's taken some damage. It's had its statistics change quite a bit throughout this game. But if you look at the original ones, it has a maneuver value of 3. It had a combat of 3, discipline of 4, morale of 7, action of 8, and this particular regiment also had additional ranks, which gave it resilience and numbers. And what that meant is essentially 2 things. It meant they could ignore the first 2 hits they took in combat. It's a one-time thing. And it also meant that they got their action points increased from what they normally would be otherwise. And action points are basically action dice. How many dice they get to roll. This is a really large regiment, so they got some extra dice. So, what does this mean? Okay. I am going to start with discipline. What discipline means is, what a discipline of 4 means, this unit can take up to 3 hits without an effect on discipline. Now, I like to mark hits with casualty figures. As they take hits, just drop them on. And this is an important element here. So, say this unit takes 4 hits, right? And this doesn't necessarily happen to have it once. One turn they might take 2 hits, and they might get 2 the next, or they might get more. Once that happens, once they have reached their discipline number of 4, something is inevitable, and that is a change in the unit's status. Okay, the unit began the battle fit. After they take 4 hits, they are going to drop a level to shaken. And shaken is going to reduce their statistics on this chart. It's just going to happen. And they are going to take a morale test. And that is where the morale number comes in. And essentially, of course, there's modifiers like most games. So things like how much do they have close support and what kind of formation they're in and such. But if they pass the morale check, they're still going to go down to shaken. They're still going down a level, but they get to hold their position. If they fail their morale test, what's going to happen is not only does their status go down from fit to shaken, they also have to retreat, and a die roll is rolled to determine that. And I'm keeping this nutshell stuff here, guys, so I'm not going into all the details. It's not like you're still going to have to buy the book if you want to play this game. But I'm just giving you the kind of a rundown how this works. So, units can go from fresh, or fit, to shaken, to exhausted, until they finally break if they go down one more level. And this is an important point to make. After this unit becomes, it's reached its discipline level, it's gone down a status, then you remove all these and you start over again. But, I would mark this. In my particular case for shaken, I was using a chicken. You could use any kind of marker that you'd want. And for exhausted, I've got 2 chickens, basically. And of course, this is going to impact other things too, right? It's going to impact their rolls and such when they're rolling the dice for various things. But the point again, just to kind of go through this, they once their discipline number is reached, they go down a grade as far as what their mental health status is, essentially. They're going to do a morale test. If they succeed, they stay in their position. If they fail, they're going to be retreating a bit. And then you clear off all the dead, all the markers, and we go through that process again. Once they take 4 more hits, what's going to happen again? They're going to go down another level again, roll the dice with a morale check to see if they're going to stay or if they're going to go back. So I think I've kind of covered that particular element, how these regiments go down. So in this particular game, you don't have to be removing casualty figures. Now, another nice thing about this game is, and I just addressed this in the first part, is you really don't even have to have figures that are based the same in this particular game. See how these aren't matched at all? Doesn't matter. If you can make the units fit in a particular size, that determines how big the unit is. And because you don't have to pull figures, it doesn't screw anything up. You could have a game where they start out like this, and you've got two regiments that match, but as you can see, it's not a 1-for-1, and you lose a stand or something, and it can kind of mess things up. Does not matter in this game at all, because these casualties they're taking, honestly, they're reflecting the mental health of the unit. In the Revolutionary War, you've got a few battles. You've got Guilford Courthouse. You've got Bunker Hill with massive casualties. But in the typical battle, you get some pretty major morale effects from taking casualties much, much lower than that. It's not going to be something where you look at the regiment and say, oh my God, they're all dead, or half of them are gone or something. There can be a regiment that routs with 30 men on the ground. That would happen. So that it makes sense. No matter how many casualties you're taking, what you're always, until they rout, you have the same amount of figures on the table. Okay, that being said, we've kind of explained how units get worn down. Now, what we're going to talk about is what they actually do. Okay, so every unit is going to have its maneuver value, its combat value, and its action points. Action points are basically how many base dice it has when it's shooting, how many base dice it has when it's in a melee. The maneuver points, there's various maneuvers you can do. That's things like marching forward. That is things like marching to the oblique. This game is actually quite generous in what a regiment can do. It's not going to waste a lot of time with, you're not going to have to get a lot of special tools or something, or worry about people saying, oh, that didn't quite work, or that didn't quite fit as much as in rule sets, because the rule is very generous as to deployment when you're deploying troops. Basically, the movement's going to have to be in a zone, off of 45 degrees, I believe, and you're generally moving your command stand and putting it where you want and making sure it can go that far, and then you're adjusting the line for it. So, in other words, it's pretty generous as far as deploying troops, maneuvering them and such. That being said, a typical for infantry, a maneuver is moving forward. It's usually 3 inches, and so you might think, oh, that's going to take forever. Well, here's the thing: this regiment starts out with 3 maneuver points, so that means they could march 9 inches if they wanted to. Now, there are some challenges to that if they do that, because you need another maneuver is loading your muskets. In this game, you actually are in charge of reloading the muskets for the regiment. Combat is basically either firing or engaging in a melee, charging someone. Well, and actually, you have to use the maneuver to get to them, and then you have to declare the melee to actually use the combat point to actually have the melee. So, what you can also do is, if you want, this game does not assume you are going to be able to do responsive fire if you get charged, for instance. If you want to have the ability to open fire on a unit that's charging you, you have to store it. So basically, you have to make sure, after you've done all your movement, all your combat, you need to essentially reserve the option of opening what's called snap fire, firing at the enemy. You can use this as opportunity fire too. So if you think you're not going to be in the range of the enemy, but you're in the defensive position, you can reserve snap fire And then when the enemy shows up, you can use it. So what I do to store those, I again use these 18th century coins. And what I have is for responsive fire, for snap fire, I would use this, and that would be a combat point. And for the right to do a counter charge, I would use one of these silver coins. But again, you can use whatever markers you want. So anyway, this is really kind of the meat of the game, because it allows you have to make these decisions. You only have so many command points. You only have so many maneuver points. You only have so many combat points. So what does this mean? Well, it means you could, for instance, with a 3-3, you could march one, you could open fire, you could then reload, you could then open fire again, and I think we still have room to reload again, right? Or you could march, you could fire, you could charge. Do you see how you can get all these different combinations? And so what it allows you to do too, if you're in a good position, it allows you to fire and fire and fire, which I guess is one criticism I've heard about this game, is that it makes it too easy to be the defender. But I've just had a game as the defender where things went very, very poorly because the other side was very aggressive and very skilled and very lucky in a few cases. And so, I don't know. I've only played one game of this so far. But there's some other things, I guess, to be aware of. And that is, how do you spend these command points? Well, you can spend them to get the unit to do something additionally. So say you've fired all your muskets and you've run out of combat points and you want to reload your muskets. You can spend a command point, and it's like, come on, boys, I need you to really move faster. And by spending that command point, you do a morale test. And of course, there's tables and such for the morale test. And if they pass, they get that extra action. And they can do it. So now, like in this case, they can, they'd have loaded muskets again. And you can keep doing that until you fail. So, if you want to have them reserve a snap fire or you want them to fire again, you could try again. But here's the catch. If you ever fail, you get a disorder token. And I just use these, I like these clear markers because they don't show much in pictures and things. They look more like rocks in pictures, but they're these translucent ones. You could use anything. So for disorder, I'm using these. And this is another important element. If during gunfire, the enemy rolls 2 6s in their fire, it inflicts a disorder token. If when they're firing, they roll 2 1s, that is considered a withering volley and they lose one of their hits. And if they roll 2 1s and 2 6s in their firing, what happens is they cancel each other out. And it can be pretty easy to collect these things. Now, there's one restriction on these troops. These are disorder tokens. These guys right now are really disordered. They're just a mess. And so before they can do any maneuvering at all, they have to remove these. So essentially what that means is this unit, that all they can do, with a maneuver of 3, all they can do is remove the disorder, which is where you can get into kind of a bind sometimes if you're under enough pressure, getting hit by enough people at once, and they're rolling well. It can put your unit in a state where it just can't hold up. It just can't stand because it's in so much disorder, which I think is probably realistic. So anyway, that's an important element too. And again, the amount of dice you roll is usually going to be your action. That's your action points. So in this particular case, this unit should be throwing 8 dice as a base, and then you have extra dice that are thrown because of modifiers and such. And they're generally going to be hitting on a 5 or a 6. So anyway, I am hoping I've covered some of the main points of this game, that if you have a rule set and if you have these descriptions, hopefully it'll give you a good idea of how to start. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in leave a comment for me, and I'll try to get back to them. And I hope this has been helpful.